Welcome once again to NPTEL, the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, being brought to you by the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Science. We are in the second module of our series of lectures in the course entitled English Language and Literature. This module, as for those of you who have been following these in a chronological manner, you are aware that this module is exclusively on the history of English language, of the English language. We have already discussed the general features or the overview in the first lecture on which was entitled Introduction to the History of the English Language, and we have been through Old English and Middle English. Today the lecture is on Early Modern English, which is lecture 4 in the second module. And before we move on to the topic proper, let us as usual take a brief look on what we did in the last lecture, what we talked about in the last lecture by way of a recap. Now, I cannot reiterate this enough that really these lectures in our course are may not be English 101 in the sense that topics are quite vast, but these lectures are, I would say, elementary, in their level, and by more like an introduction to each of these lectures is an introduction to the topic declared in each of these. And for those of you who are not in engineering colleges, the students of which are the target audience for these lectures, may want to view these lectures, learn from these, or in simply by way of recapitulating what you had learned in your say BA English major, etc. These lectures are by no means high level ones. So, I would like the audience to appreciate the level in which we are talking. It may be an elementary level, but these are always, at least to my experience as a student and teacher, always relevant and things that we need to visit time and again. So, we found in our last lecture on Middle English that the Middle English period was one of great change, and we had taken recourse to books like A.C. Baugh's History of the English Language and several other texts, which as I said have mentioned also in some other lectures. These books are regarded classics. They are books that one can go back always, right, to know about the established, at least the established features of English at any given time in the past, right. So, in one of these books we find that the Middle English period was a period of great change, and we know that the Norman conquest, you must realize this, that the lectures that many of the lectures that we give here, and ideally it should be so, are always related to political maybe upheavals or general political changes, the changes of power from one hand to another, social factors, technological factors like say the Industrial Revolution, about which we will be talking a lot in the next lecture on modern English. So, here too we find that the Norman conquest and the conditions that followed were responsible for a period of great change. And yet we also find continuations of tendencies that had begun to manifest themselves in Old English. See, the division of periods or epochs, not really exactly eras, ages in history, as you will know, does not imply watertight boundaries, right. Does not imply that one age moves into the next and that there are no remnants from the previous age, or that there are no glimmerings of what is to come. In the same way, though we had major changes following the coming of the Norman French, the conquest by the Norman French, about which we talked at great length in the last lecture. Okay, there were also in the Middle Ages, in Middle English, the continuation of certain tendencies, okay, following the coming in of Anglo-Saxons, okay, and the beginning of the Anglo-Saxon language. Now, next we also found importantly that the last phase, that is Middle English, marked the decay of inflectional endings. Okay. The grammar, as mentioned here in one of the texts, the grammar of the English language was reduced from a highly inflected language to an analytical one. Now, the endings of these nouns, adjectives, okay, and to some extent verbs were altered in pronunciation in a way that almost lost their distinctive form, right. Now, we also found that borrowing from the vocabulary of the French, okay, the sheer importance given to French culture, the need of the people to cultivate, right, French culture, not just its manners or mannerisms or fashions, etc., is also what was important. Also was in the Middle Ages. Sorry again, I am so sorry. In Middle English, okay, was the borrowing of words, okay, from French. For instance, we found that there were governmental and administrative words like government itself, governor, administrator, then crown, princess, okay, things indicating class, for instance, servant, right, peasant, slave, noble, etc. Also very important were ecclesiastical words, okay, ecclesiastical words like religion, theology, sermon, mystery, devotion, miracle, hermit. These are some of the words we find which came in and became part and parcel of the English language following the Norman conquest in the time of what we now call Middle English. Then law and the army and navy, these were also, there were also the sort of inclusion of words from these domains. For instance, decree, okay, from law, decree, proof, bail, then punishment, prison, right. These are some of the words that have come in. Justice itself, the word justice, the word crime itself, fine. Then from the army and navy, the word army, navy, peace, lieutenant or lieutenant, enemy, dart, sergeant, chieftain, havoc, etc. These were the words that came and enriched the English language. Also from fashion and meals and social life, cultural life in general. These are some of the words which I have taken from various sources. These include fashion, dress, habit, gown, coat, and for food, beef, mutton, sausage, gravy, biscuit, cream, sugar, etc. So, these the words which we think which to us are English words, it is to be remembered are words that have come from various languages, and particularly when we talk about Middle English, okay, the Norman conquest was, as I said, a landmark, right, was a landmark event in or series of events in during that time, which had enormous repercussions for further growth and change of the English language. Then not the least in art, learning and medicine also we find words like chronicle, the very word paper, pen, okay, copy, then malady, right, plague, remedy from the domain of from medicine and the medical sciences, poison, arsenic, right. These are some of the words that have come in. Then we also found very important point, which is the rise of standard English, okay, and let me quickly again read. This is available in the last lecture, but let us just quickly go through it again. By the end of the 14th century, a language emerged in the written form that varied with the local dialects. This was recognized as the standard language both in English and writing, and was called London English. It is very important, okay. The rise for the first time really, even though there may have been a sporadic emergence of a dialect that was going to become more or less a standardized or standard dialect. It is in this time that we find the rise of standard English, okay. So, by the end of the 14th century, which was known as London English, or it was the dialect of East Midland. Okay, so that was a clear indication of of the emergence of a standard or standardized English, okay, which is London or East Midland dialect. And also this region was also a vastly populated one, it was also a large one, and in terms of trade, etc., or in terms of general prosperity, this region was also, okay, so sort of this region was the sort of hub, right, and perhaps for that reason, as many scholars would insist, okay, this East Midland dialect or the London English became the standardized English or standard English. Now, we also found that that much has been said about the importance of London English, okay, and let me then read again from Baugh. By far the most influential factor in the rise of standard English was the importance of London as the capital of England. London English took as well as gave. It began as a southern and ended as a Midland dialect, and the London standard had been accepted in most parts of the country in writing in the latter part of the 15th century. Okay. So, this is finally how it came to be established by the 15th century. Now, we come to early modern English, and we do not really speak of just a modern English. Okay. We usually divide the history of the English language at this time, okay, into two distinct categories. These are early modern English and modern English or late modern English. Okay. Modern English, late modern English is usually referred to as modern English, which is the topic of discussion in our next lecture. Okay. So, again you may look at several texts, but for our purposes, Baugh's again a history of the English language, and Indrani Ghosh, history of the English language, a critical companion. These are some of the books that I have consulted for this lecture, and also in a minor way some other books. So, in general, as I said, modern English, what I said in the last just a couple of minutes seconds ago, in general, if you say modern English, you would start from say from the 16th century, that is 1500. Okay. And in particular, the Renaissance, which is 1500 to 1650, is a time that is enormously important for us as far as its early modern English is concerned, right. Now, scholars list the changing conditions in the modern period, and let us look at this slowly and carefully, right. Now, again according to Baugh, there are particular events in the development of languages which have often have recognizable effects, like the Norman Conquest and the Black Death, or the bubonic plague. Okay. Now, the new factors which are there in the development of modern English, right, were four. The macro ones were four, there were several others, but for our purposes it is enough for us to know that there were four very important socio-economic conditions under which modern English developed, particularly early modern English. Okay. So, these are the coming of the printing press, okay, the bringing in of the printing press by William Caxton in England, and also second, the rapid spread, as it were, of popular education in England. Then also the increased means of social communication. Okay. Then finally, the growth of social consciousness with the rapid growth, okay, of reading following the printing press, and thereafter the rapid growth of social communication. Do you understand? So, what are the first 4 points that we have? This is the coming in of the printing press. Number 2 is the rapid spread of popular education, then increased communication and increased social communication, and the growth of social consciousness. Now, let us take an example, a very brief extract from A.C. Baugh's book, and then we will have an idea of what things were, conditions were at that time. Now, from A.C. Baugh's History of the English Language. The majority of these, it is true, were in Latin, whereas it is in the modern languages that the effect of the printing press was chiefly to be felt. But in England, over 20,000 titles in English had appeared by 1640. The result was to bring books which had formerly been, look at this, the expensive luxury of the few. Okay. Things no longer stopped at this. Okay. Books were no longer the things of luxury that were available only to the rich or only to the poor or only in manuscript form in abbeys or churches or in other libraries, right. As Boss says, the result was to bring books which had formerly been the expensive luxury of the few within the reach of all. Okay. We were talking about in the previous slide, it relates to the rapid spread of popular education with the coming in of the printing press. Then it was possible to reproduce a book in 1,000 copies or even 100,000, every one exactly like the other. And he says, he comments here, a powerful force thus existed for promoting a standard uniform language. Okay. You see how, when we are talking about this, we can talk about this over and over again, okay, how the impact, how technology has an impact, okay, ultimately on social consciousness, right. We had the coming in of the printing press in England, we had the availability, okay, as he says here, maybe 1,000 or maybe even 100,000 copies of books which were, available or accessible to a very to a very small part of the population. Once you had 100,000 or more copies of one text, okay, what happened was many people, it's not even now, at this time, it is not that everyone has a copy of the book, okay, but maybe through growth of lending libraries or even through personal contact, you were able by this time, okay, to be able to read books which were not accessible to you. So, therefore, we had the growth of popular education. Also, reading, possessing books must have also become a matter of pride to be able to have a collection of books. Okay. So, as he says, a powerful force. Bohr calls it a powerful force. The printing press was a powerful force. Okay. A powerful force thus existed, and along with this, of course, also was a standard uniform language. Now, why is it important? Because you had whatever the printing press was providing to you was English of a certain kind, of a certain standard, of a certain dialect. Okay. Now, when you had more people who are reading these books, okay, with the spread of popular education or even of the enlarging of the growth of the reading public, okay, what happened was it led to them also speaking a certain standard or a certain dialect, if you will, of a variety of English. So, this again led to what we found was a very important point. The first point in our lecture here was that the rise of a standard English, and that which was the Midland dialect, East Midland dialect, or what we call the London English. So, there was then the rapid spread of popular education. Literacy was becoming common. In Shakespeare's London, almost more than half of the people could read. In the 17th and 18th centuries, there was an increase in the number of schools, and the tradesman class arose, for whom obtaining an education also was immensely important. Okay. So, what we have by now, we have found that definitely compared to the Middle Ages, not to talk about Middle English, not to talk about Old English, compared to Old and Middle Englishes, what happened was, and during this time, okay, there was literacy was something that was common and was increasingly being expected of people, right, and many people could read by the time of Shakespeare's England, okay, by the 16th, 17th centuries, and here it says in the 17th and 18th centuries, there was an increase also in the number of schools, okay, and you had the rise of the mercantile class, the rise of the tradesman class, for whom being literate was very important, for whom even getting an education was very important. So, there are radical forces in matters of vocabulary and in matters of grammar, and conservative forces in matters of grammar. Okay. So, during this stage when we talk about grammar and vocabulary, there are two tendencies that we see. Okay. With regard to vocabulary, it appears now that the forces of change were radical, while as far as grammar is concerned, the forces were conservative ones, right. Though in the Middle Ages, Middle English period, changes in grammar were considered revolutionary, okay, whereas changes in vocabulary were not. It was seemed as if it was quite the opposite when we come down to this age. Then we also had what we call was the what Baugh calls the problem of the vernaculars. Okay. The three great problems faced by modern languages in the 16th century were these: A, recognition in the fields where Latin had for centuries being supreme, okay, the establishment of a more uniform orthography and the enrichment of the vocabulary, so that it would be adequate to meet the demands that would be made upon it in its wider use. Okay. So, this was the time when compared to Latin, there were other languages. Do you understand? There were languages that, generally speaking, okay, in Europe, there are languages that were coming up for recognition, otherwise in which the classical languages had held sway. As Baugh says in his book, beside the classical languages which seemingly had attained perfection, the vulgar terms seemed immature, unpolished and limited in resource, right. There was this attraction towards ancient learning, towards Latin and Greek, and therefore, we also find that vernaculars, okay, languages like English were in a struggle, so to speak, for recognition, right. You have all heard of the revival of learning which we call the Renaissance. It was a revival of interest, great interest not only in the languages, but also in the cultures, also in the art, also on the philosophy, great interest in the philosophy of ancient Greece and Rome. Okay. So, Greek and Latin were languages just like in the Middle English period. Okay. It was it was considered to be a matter of pride, to know French, right, to know French manners, to be well versed in the French language, okay, in French art, cuisine, etc. Right. So, also we will find by the Renaissance a knowledge or at least an interest in things classical, okay, was something that was considered desirable, okay, if one were to make one's mark among scholars, among poets, even among scientists. A knowledge of the classics was considered very, very desirable. Okay. So, therefore, there was the renewed interest in Latin and Greek, and as Baugh says, besides these so called polished ancient languages, okay, languages with a great history behind them, okay, which languages that seem to have attained almost a stage of perfection, other languages, what we call the vulgar terms, vulgar tongues seemed rather immature and unpolished and limited in their resources. This is what again Baugh says, okay. How then do we account for English, right? And I am bringing in this passage here from Baugh, and let us see how he explains this, okay. Please look at this slide. Baugh says the real force behind the use of English, let us underline this, was a popular demand, the demand of all, so look at this is very important, all sorts of men in practical life. Look at these words, popular, practical, all sorts of men. Okay. Let us read this again. The real force behind the use of English was a popular demand, the demand of all sorts of men in practical life to share in the fruits of the Renaissance. The revival of learning had revealed how rich was the store of knowledge and experience preserved from the civilizations of Greece and Rome. The ancients had not only lived, but had thought about life and drawn practical conclusions from experience. Much was to be learned from their discussion of conduct and ethics, their ideas of government and the state, their political precepts, their theories of education, their knowledge of military science and the like. Okay. So, it was considered that if you knew the English language, right, you could have access to the great ideas of of the ancients through of Latin and Greek, okay, especially through translations. So, the revival of learning, as Bose says, had revealed how rich was the store of knowledge and experience preserved from the civilizations of Greek and Rome. So, you see there you had Anglo-Saxon English, and then you had the French, the Norman French conquest, right, where there was this historic tussle between the French language and the English language. Okay. Here we had a language that had begun to have its first almost official standardized version in London English, thanks to the rise again of London as the center, okay, of England. And on the other hand, you also had sort of, I would not use the word pressure, but also there was also this great temptation to go into things that were classical and to learn the classical languages. Do you understand? So, you would find the English language time and again sort of it is Anglo-Saxon English, okay, sort of always facing these forces of other languages from other places. The question arises, okay, of enrichment. Now, when we allow, okay, this question may arise anywhere with any language, for instance. Is it a matter of enrichment when we allow? I shouldn't use the word allow really, but when we take words, or we have foreign loan words, we take words from other languages, okay, and they become part of us. So, scholars call this the problem of enrichment, and the problem is one of enlarging the vocabulary. Okay. So, what might happen is if you borrow too much, okay, from Latin and Greek or from French, or if your neologisms or new words, okay, are etymologically heavily leaning on these languages, okay, then the Anglo-Saxon or the English that you are talking about may be viewed by people by some as inadequate, especially as compared to classical languages. You are coining new words, okay, based on antiquity, okay. You already have words from another country, okay, which had come and conquered you, right. And you had not only that, you also had borrowings from say Italian and Spanish, etc. Okay. So, is this a matter of enlarging, simply enlarging the vocabulary, okay, or is it a problem of enrichment through others? Now, this is something that we leave to the linguists and the people of philology and the people in the history of languages to decide and debate. Just suffice it here to just bring it to your notice that whatever was seen as inclusion and enlargement of vocabulary and the growth of vocabulary may also be seen as a problem of sort of downplaying, okay, downplaying the sort of vernacular, if you may use the word here, when you allow a lot of what is quote unquote foreign influence, okay, to come in to the existing language. Let us quickly look at this slide on this for and against the borrowing of words. Like Boe again here he makes this observation, okay. He says the wholesale borrowing of words, look at this language, the wholesale borrowing of words from other languages did not meet with universal favor, okay. So, it is not that everyone was happy that words have been brought or imported, so to speak, from other languages. This the strangeness of the new words was an objection to some people. Now, it is not that the word is new, okay. If it comes from another language, the intonation is new, okay, the pronunciation is new, the cultural resonances that words carry, these are felt to be alien by many people, this is idea that this word is not exactly homegrown. Okay. So, it has several various even political resonances as it comes into one's vernacular language. Okay. So, let's read this again. The wholesale borrowing of words from other languages did not meet with universal favor. The strangeness of the new words was an objection to some people. Now, however, there were more scholarly people who looked at this phenomenon, okay, of borrowing words from other languages in a more balanced manner. And John Dryden, for instance, many of you may have heard of the great poet John Dryden. Dryden was of the opinion, okay, that as long as the importations was, as Boss says, judicious, as long as these were judicious importations, one should not really have much to complain as far as borrowing words was concerned. Okay. So, it was a matter of balancing the coming in of new words as against the existing tendency or existing pool of words that were there since the Anglo-Saxon times or even before these times. So, some there are a few borrowed words here, for instance, that we may refer to, and from Greek, for instance, the words that were borrowed were encyclopedia, acme, anonymous, criterion, ephemeral, lexicon, polemic, tantalize, tonic, thermometer. Then let us look at again what Boss says about the method of introducing these new words. Okay. Now, the Latin words usually were from the medium of writing. The words borrowed from the Romance languages often entered through books, and Baugh here mentions, and I will quickly read this quotation, what writers like say Thomas More and Thomas Eliot were doing was being done by numerous others, and it is necessary to recognize the importance of individuals as makers of English in the 16th and early 17th century. Okay. These are what we get through their works or through, as it says, the medium of writing. By 1721, we find this 150 years later, after Mulcaster had urged for the compilation of a dictionary in 1582, the first dictionary was published by Nathaniel Barley called Universal Etymological English Dictionary. Okay. The earliest dictionaries explain the meanings of the words in Latin or other foreign languages and hard words in English. Okay. So, we had these early dictionaries would go to great lengths, okay, to explain the meanings of the words which came from Latin or other languages, or even words that were in English, but were considered difficult. Now, let us look at some of the important dictionaries that are listed here in the 17th century mostly. These are Robert Cordray's the Table Alphabetical of Hard Words, John Bullock's English Expositor 1616, the first is 1604, Henry Cockerham's English Dictionary 1616, Edward Phillips's New World of Words 1658, Glossographia by Blount 1656, and Dr. Samuel Johnson's famous A Dictionary of the English Language in 1755. We also find the great influence of a writer like Shakespeare as far as the vocabulary is concerned. Okay. Say Shakespeare invented over 1700 words. Some of these are mentioned here, for instance, cold-blooded, besmirch, bandit, luggage, majestic, moonbeam, negotiate. There are so many words and that we do not realize have come to us from Shakespeare. For instance, the word like hobnob, marketable. Okay, the word marketable you may think is more of a modern, more or later word than and we would not expect that to come from Shakespeare's time probably, but these are some of the words that Shakespeare had given us: zany, worthless, secure, skim milk, etc. There were further also many expressions that we get from Shakespeare, okay, very innovative ones that have become part of early modern English. Okay. Cold comfort. Cold comfort is such a phrase then clear out bag and baggage, without rhyme or reason, then goodness sake or by Jove, okay, that truth will out, vanish into thin air. These are some of the expressions, that phrases that we owe to Shakespeare. As far as grammatical features were concerned, this is what Baugh has to say. I am quoting from Baugh. English grammar in the 16th and 17th century is marked more by the survival of certain forms and usages that have since disappeared than by any fundamental developments. Okay. The great changes which reduced the inflections of Old English to their modern proportions had already taken place, and we remember in our last lecture on Middle English, this was these inflectional, the changes regarding inflections what were highlighted there. Okay. And Baugh says that as far as grammar is concerned, okay, in the early modern, beginning with the early modern phase of English, what we find that it says here is marked more by survival of certain forms and usages, okay, that have disappeared than any really great fundamental change that came in. And already said you could say the pruning of the language, the pruning of the inflections, of inflectional endings had already happened before this. Okay. So, if we have to end with the general characteristics of this period, there would be 4 points from Baugh again that we need to learn, right. We find that A, there was a conscious interest of the people in the English language. Okay. This is important, a conscious interest of the people in the English language. That is, there was a new attitude towards the language and an attention to its problems. So, that could be seen during this time. Okay. So, we have a conscious interest of the people in the English language, a new attitude towards the language and an attention to its problems, all we would say in a bid to this new, the emerging London English dialect as a standard, the standard dialect or standard language during that time. Okay. Then importantly, the second point, in this period something in the nature of a standard, and not just standard, a recognizably modern form of the language was attained, scholars say at this time. Okay. So, there was not only just a standard language, you can have a standard language in any time, any dialect can be a standard dialect, okay, in any time in the history of any language. Okay. The important thing was the fact that the language had a modern form to it, thanks mostly to the final ending of inflectional endings, which had begun in the Middle English period. English in the Renaissance was much more plastic. Plastic, by here plastic we mean far more amenable to change, okay, far more, for instance, we use the word plasticity when we talk about neural plasticity. Okay. So, I would say the quality of its quality of adaptability, okay, to adapt itself to change because of its flexibility. Okay. So, English in the Renaissance, as Baugh says, was much more plastic than today, as men felt freer to mold it according to their wills. Okay. It is interesting, it is not that you may think instinctively, or it may you may think it sort of in a quote unquote commonsensical way that things become more plastic or more flexible with time. It is not so. In the next lecture, when you look at American English, you will find that there are some very interestingly some tendencies to freeze the language that they brought from England to the New World, whereas in England those were already changing. Okay. So, it does not mean that just because one has gone to into a new land, or just with the passage of time that language freezing will go off. It is not so simple a phenomenon. Okay. So, the English language was far more plastic, far more flexible, adaptable. It was taking in, it had always and it was still taking in new words, okay, from other languages, to an extent of course, where it became problematic, right. It became a question of nationalistic interest, whether one should allow so many languages to be added, so many words from so many languages to be added to the mother tongue, right. So, there many features were still unsettled though with regard to spelling and pronunciation. As because of this sort of tendency where things were quite fluid, that there was a standard and at the same time there was a standard dialect at the same time there were other probably other standards probably that were clamoring for inclusion into the rising London English, and these features like pronunciation for instance were not what we find today in the official sort of Queen's English as we say. Okay. So, spelling and pronunciation were still fluid and people were still experimenting different you could say different parts of England were probably people in different parts of England were probably also showcasing their pronunciations and their spelling. So, the time it was only by the modern age okay, that you find that the establishment of a greater stability. Okay. Even though of course, in modern English we also have the important variations that we find in beginning with the New World with America and with places like India, places like Australia, etc. Okay. So, we have come to the end of this introductory glimpse into early modern English, and instead of doing a recap of what we have learned, let me pose questions to you and give you an example of how you may want to attempt those questions. Okay. For instance, the first question may be something like, what were the 4 most important changing conditions okay, in modern English, particularly early modern English, okay, which differentiate it in a radical way from the previous periods in the history of the English language. Okay. So, these are, you would say that there are 4 factors okay, which led to the growth of early modern and eventually modern English. And we also say that we do not take modern English as from as one homogeneous age. We break it okay, from the Renaissance onwards, and we break it into early modern English and late modern or modern English. So, the 4 factors were very importantly the bringing in of the printing press by Caxton okay, to England, and following that what happened was were the others, the next 3, that is the rapid spread of popular education okay, with the availability of books. Then there is increased communication and increased social communication. Okay. Playhouses right, played very important, you did not have the modern pubs that you did. Okay. The playhouses were the most important probably avenues and arenas of social communication the people. Okay. Then finally, the growth of social consciousness, with the playhouses, and next the availability of texts, okay, the availability of what we today call hard text, right, because of the coming in of the printing press. That was question number 1. Now, if you get a question like this, according to the scholar A.C. Baugh, a powerful force existed for promoting a standard uniform language. Explain. Okay. Now, you have to explain what this powerful force was, right. So, you would then say again that this powerful force was that of the printing press, and you can also say that in it resulted okay, in this important cultural phenomenon, that was the availability of texts which were hitherto what? Which were hitherto items of luxury, okay, or items of access and privilege. Okay. With the availability of hundreds of thousands of copies of a single text, right, there were bound to be enormous social changes which also led to the change or or to the growth and development of the language. More people were using it. The second important point regarding this powerful force was that it had to lead to a standardized English. Why? Because people hitherto were very different. You may find people just within a few kilometers being different as far as their usage, as far as their pronunciation was concerned, as far as the spelling was concerned, particularly with spelling, okay, particularly with things like turns of phrase, right. When they are available to you in the forms of text, and that is a text that is being read by everyone, it eventually obviously would lead to a certain standardized form of the language. So, a sort of this marks the end of a sort of a certain, if I may use the word, it's a certain chaotic element as far as the English language was concerned. Okay. So, we have the rise of standardized English, okay, which was, we will talk about it next, that would be the next question. Okay. Another question would be, what were the other changes, okay, in society, for instance, and you would say one very important change was the availability or the the establishment, increase in the establishment of a number of schools. Okay. Now, again with schools, what happens is you get standardized versions of a language. Okay. Everyone in a school and nearby schools were learning the same kind, probably from the same text. Okay, so there has to be a standardization, and also there was the rise, again second point, the rise of a certain class, which was the tradesman class or the mercantile class, for whom education was very important. Okay. Next, what was what is the two-faced or two-sided aspect to the question of the vernaculars, okay, vis-a-vis the so called prestige languages, like the languages of antiquity, like Latin and Greek, and language of prestige, which was there in the last period, Middle Ages, Middle English, which was French. Okay. So, there are two, we may talk about two things. One is, of course, that there is a need with the revival of learning, with the Renaissance, okay, to also know Latin and Greek. Okay. Just as in the previous age, French was so important for many people to know and learn French. Okay. More so because by as Baugh says, when you placed the so called vernacular alongside the Greek and the Latin, then the vernacular tongues would then seem what we call vulgar tongue, the tongue of the common man's language, okay, seemed immature, as Baugh says, limited and unpolished. So, this was one part of the problem. Okay. Then the other aspect to it was, again, all sorts of people, all sorts of men, which probably means people from all classes, okay, to put it in another way, or all classes, okay, wanted access to the ideas of the ancients, okay, as far as practical life was concerned, as far as philosophy was concerned, right. But again, the other side of the picture is this, that people wanted, the other side of the story was that people were worried, okay, with what they found, as many are worried as with what they read as a random inclusion of words from other languages. Okay. There is a question also, the rise of the nationalistic fervor, which we see since the time of Geoffrey Chaucer. Okay. There was the rise of the nationalistic spirit and too much deviation from Anglo-Saxon, right, or too many borrowings, this is more correct, too many borrowings from other languages were even to be seen as anti-nationalistic. Okay. We also had scholars, as I said, like John Dryden, who said that judicious importations, as reported by A.C. Baugh, judicious importations from other languages was fine, and one had to know when a word was to be considered, how of course one word was to be considered judicious. Then therefore, the next question would be, what is the what do you refer, what is referred to as a problem of enrichment? This is it's a similar answer really. Was it considered a matter of enrichment, or was it considered a matter of dependence? Okay. So, was it enriching the vocabulary? Were they enriching the vocabulary by allowing other words to come in, or were they being dependent too much on other tongues? Then you could also get a question on the importance of dictionaries. For instance, why were dictionaries so important at this time? Okay. Dictionaries were important at this time for two reasons. And say that reason one was of course because of the the sheer growth, right, of the lexicon. Okay. Because of the printing press and the growth of publishing, right. Because of that, there was a need to have dictionaries, so that words that were being now available. See the number and the kind of words that were now being available to people. That this was a force that was not there before, right. How many new words can you know only through social conversation, or only through hearsay? Here you had books which had so many words that many people could not understand. Okay. So, the rise, or this is the time of the dictionary, right, the first dictionaries, and second, it was important also to unpack the meaning of words that were even in English that were considered hard. Okay. For instance, as we saw here, the earliest dictionaries explain the meanings of the words in Latin or other foreign languages, and so called hard words in English. So, the growth of the dictionary was it was inevitable that during this time there would be numerous dictionaries that were coming out, okay, and finally culminating in the one great dictionary of those times of the 18th century, which was the Dictionary of the English Language by Dr. Samuel Johnson, okay, in 1755. So, we shall stop here now, and the last question of course was you could get a question on describe or enumerate some of the words and phrases which are current even today, okay, which are attributed to the great writer and dramatist and poet William Shakespeare. So, you have a number of words here in these slides. Okay. For instance, salad days, the word it's Greek to me. These are some of the phrases that we find in Shakespeare's works, and also we have words like dawn, dwindle, eyeball, picture, moonbeam, luggage, gossip, Olympian, pedant, radiance. These are words that come from Shakespeare. Okay. So, this again is just a glimpse into the kind of issues that we had during the early modern period. Okay. And we found the importance of Shakespeare, and most importantly really the printing press, the coming in of the printing press, and the question of the vernaculars versus borrowing, the problematic question of foreign loan words. Okay. These are only some of the aspects, and really if you have in one lecture you cannot begin to even touch upon so many other areas, but for a course like this it's enough that you know some of the aspects, and most importantly learn how to connect. This has been my effort here. Okay. Learn how to connect the social, political and the economic to changes in language. This is very important. Learn also that languages are highly politically charged. Every change are also, for instance, there may be certain times where issues regarding even changes in language, even vocabulary, pronunciation, spelling may also be largely political questions, questions of nationalism, questions of allowing, not allowing, questions of the rise of a standard form of English, which today of course is the biggest contentious issue. Is the Queen's English has today become, perhaps it's it's quite safe to say only one variant of English, because we have, as we saw in module 1, so many Englishes. Okay, we no longer talk about world English, we talk about world English itself is an oxymoron. Okay, world Englishes is, as we saw in our lecture, one of the lectures in the first module. Okay, world Englishes is the current term that we use. Okay, but you see what, in this different glimpses into the 4 different periods that we have used for the English language, how the language has changed, okay, owing to socio-economic factors, owing to conquests, you understand, and finally, as you see in the next lecture on modern English, okay, owing to the growth of different industries, particularly the information industry. Thank you so much.